Hey folks, this is Takota Coen here on Coen Farm, and in this video I want to give you an update on a new natural building technique I've been experimenting with, building our pigeon cote here on the farm. It's called light straw clay. So this is it's a natural building technique that I first became aware of probably about 4 or 5 years ago when I was looking at building a house for myself, and I was trying to figure out how could I build it, really inexpensively using materials, that were readily available in our ecosystems. And my parents actually built a straw bale house in 2008 and just loved it. However, there's some pros and cons to all natural building techniques, and I'd never actually heard of this one until I was doing research into my own what I was going to do for my house. And so anyways, I stumbled across this, and just some of the things that I really liked about it is one, it's been used for almost 1,000 years in Europe. So there's has a long history of it's basically lasted through the test of time. Two, it can be used with modern framing techniques. So a lot of the straw bale construction, the problems with that is that you have to either go with timber frame and then do like straw infill, or you have to go with kind of like prefabricated panels, or just other kind of. To be honest, they seemed, as I've looked through some of the different techniques and systems, they just seemed kind of Mickey Mouse. And so because of my background as a carpenter and doing a lot of framing, I have experience with just regular stick framing, which is sometimes called platform framing. And so I like the idea of being able to use a skill set that I know a lot about, and then just adding in essentially a natural insulation inside of a normal framing system. So the other reason I liked it is that you can use, or it's a lot easier because you're using standard stick framing. You can use regular siding. You can use regular interior finishes that are that you would normally just nail onto the studs. There's a few things that you have to do a bit differently. Mainly that you have to make sure that there's always airflow behind or in between whatever your sheathing or interior coverings are and your outside walls. But I really liked the idea that all the experience that I have in construction, I could just apply it right into this system, and there wasn't a big steep learning curve and all these different new techniques that I had to try to experiment with. One of the other things that I also like about it is because it's again that stick framing, there are standard running electrical conduits and plumbing stuff. It all if I were to get trades in to help build a house like this, they're not going to be like, oh geez, what do I do? It's a bit more approachable. Anytime you start talking about building a house with straw, there's always jokes about, oh, didn't you read the story about the 3 pigs, right? But with this, it seems more. It's less daunting for myself and for any trades that I was going to get to do the work. So that was some of my main interests in doing this work. The other one is the use of kind of getting the best of both worlds for thermal mass and insulation, because you're actually mixing clay right into the straw itself. So yeah, I thought it was a really neat system. It's been used for a long time. It's you don't have to have a lot of specialized, at least for me with my experience in framing, there wasn't a huge learning curve to switch over to this. And also just looking at some of the books that I read early on, there's a really great one by Paul and Robert Laporte called the Eco Nest Home. That is just a really cool building, and another one by Lydia Dolman called Light Straw Clay Construction. And these are really the only 2 books that I had to take a look at to learn the basics of the construction. Everything else, there wasn't a ton of YouTube videos that I could find about this construction technique. So I it was basically those two books, and and then before jumping into building a house for myself, I wanted to experiment with a smaller structure. So I'm standing in it's about a 10-foot by 10-foot, with 8-foot tall walls, and just a standard 312 gable roof. It's really simple. This could be a garden shed, or any kind of storage building that if you're thinking about doing this kind of construction for your own home, I would recommend starting with a smaller kind of sample building before you jump into the big one. And so for me, this building is actually, I got a good friend of mine, Christine Kowalchuk, from the University of Alberta, was applied for a grant to experiment with natural building and natural farming techniques. And so she approached me. It was a couple of years ago. We've been working on this for a while. COVID kind of and all the lockdowns and stuff really put a wrench in our plans, because we were planning on doing a workshop on. Originally, we were going to build a pigeon cote, which is essentially a chicken house for pigeons. But as opposed to you having to feed them, they'll go out and scavenge for their own seeds, and then fly in. I've got the gables open on either side of this, and eventually they'll be, everything else will be screened in, but they'll be able to fly in, and I'll have ledges, and there's little bowls for them to nest in and lay their eggs and stuff. And so they'll essentially live in here, but they'll be feral and going out and foraging for their own food and coming back, and I'll be able to harvest. I believe for every 10 or 15 pigeons, you can get like a bushel or two of really high quality fertilizer. That can be used for gardens or fruit trees or things like that. So this is a because I'm really interested in do nothing style of farming. I was particularly intrigued by the idea of building this kind of a pigeon cote, and we couldn't get a mason out here because the travel restrictions and stuff. So eventually I was like, well, hey, I was doing some research on building with light straw clay a few years ago. Why don't we just build it out of that, and then I don't need to bring in some stonemason from Ontario or something. I can do it all in house, because it's something I've experience with in terms of framing and stuff. So that's kind of I lucked out in that my initial sample building is something that there's actually government money or government funding for to do this, which is an extra bonus. But yeah, I would highly recommend doing a small structure like this before you get into the bigger style buildings, because for one, this is 2x4 construction. So the walls are only 3.5 inches thick, versus the standard recommendation is walls that are 11 to 12 inches thick. So it's basically 4 times thicker. And so to give you an idea of how long it took me to pack the light straw clay into these walls and do all that work, is it took about I would say it would be probably 2 full days with 2 people. I broke it up with my intern Ben, and we spread it up over, it was 4 or 5 days, just doing a couple hours every day. But if you were to really put your time into it, I'd say it'd be about a day and a half to 2 days for 2 people working 8 to 10 hours a day, just for 3.5 inch walls. So if you were to expand that out to 11-inch walls, it's going to take a lot longer. So definitely, if you're thinking about building a house with those full walls, give it a shot first with a smaller test building like this. If this is going to make a great garden shed, or in my case a pigeon cote, but this is a really perfect building for that you're going to need anyway. So give it a trial. So just to walk you through kind of the workflow of how I did this, because in the books, both the books by Lydia Coleman and Paul and Robert, they talk about these specialized mixing machines, which is basically like a 2 or 3 foot, 3 foot diameter culvert with spikes in it on like a drum rolling system that you have pipes and that run the clay down. And there's lots of mixing and screening, and there's many steps to kind of get to making the wet version of the light straw clay. And so I didn't want to, mess around with that. I figured, no, I want to see. I figured people have been building like this for 1,000 years. I guarantee they didn't have those, drum rollers, and they probably weren't getting, bags of clay that were, a perfect consistency. So I was like, you know what? I want to experiment. Like how low tech and low embodied energy can I get with building this structure? So literally. A couple years ago, a year ago, we had to trench in a water line, and so I had an excess spoil pile of clay that was left over from when I backfilled. So I just went and grabbed the tractor, grabbed the bucket of clay, dumped it on the ground, and I staged everything. So because I was only going to do everything by hand, I staged it so it was really close to the building. So I had my pile of clay, and then I just took standard 5-gallon buckets. And I would, and like there were like big nasty clay lumps, and it wasn't screened. In the books they talk about using pulverizers and screening systems to get it all perfect. So what I did is I had a bunch of 5-gallon buckets. I took just raw clay. There's a bit of black dirt mixed into it. Put it into the 5-gallon buckets, and I would soak it overnight, and that would help soften the lumps of clay and stuff like that. Then the next morning I would mix them just with a standard mud drill. I used to do tiling, so I already had that. So I just mixed it in the 5-gallon buckets until I could kind of break up the lumps. And I could hear rocks and stuff banging around, but I wasn't worried about it because then I dumped those 5-gallon buckets into a large. It was half of a 45-gallon drum. It's just a blue plastic barrel. So I would put all of my 5-gallon buckets into there. And that way the rocks would be able to, sink to the bottom, and any stuff that couldn't break, that I didn't want to have, rising to the top with the clay, it would all go to the bottom. I mixed it in there and got my consistency right. And the consistency that you're going for it's really simple. You basically you dip your hand into the clay, and then you kind of take your fingers, and what you're wanting to see is you don't want the clay to just like run off. So like when you hold your hand, you want the clay particles to like stay stuck to your hand so that they're not dripping off and you're starting to see your hand through the clay. That's too runny. But then if you take your hand and you kind of pull your fingers apart, if you see a bunch of webbing, then it's too thick. There's too much clay in it. And so you just add a bit more water. So by pre-mixing, pre-softening the clay in the 5-gallon buckets, keeping it quite thick so it mixed well, then dumping it into this larger tub that I could get the consistency right with water. Once I would check that, I would then take the clay slip, as it's called, and I just built I took about 4 sheets of plywood, and I just tacked them together. So I had like a nice smooth mixing platform, and I had a round bale of straw. To do this 10 by 10 building, 8-foot tall walls, took about half of a big round bale. So probably about 500-600 pounds of straw, even with the 3.5-inch wall. So I used a lot more straw than I thought it was going to. So then I would take the straw, throw the straw on the platform, and just dump the clay slip on top of that. And I just mixed it by hand. I tried actually getting like a 3-point hitch concrete mixer. It was like a Cosmo, 13 yard or 13 cubic foot mixer. It didn't work very well, and I tried it for about 5 minutes. I was like, no, it'll be faster by hand. So I ended up mixing it all by hand with just a pitchfork. And then from there, I would pile it up right next to the building, and I just brought it into the building in tubs and would pack it into the walls using just broken shovel handles. I found worked really well. They had like the D grip. That you could, if you really needed to get into corners, you could use the pointy end, or you turn it the other way around and use that D grip handle as the basis of your tamper. Then I made these little strips. It was just scraps of plywood I had laying around. I think they're about 16-inch strips of plywood, and I screwed them onto the studs. And then in a 16-inch strip, you put your light clay straw in layers, a few inches deep. You pack it in. And then you put another layer in, pack it in, put another layer, pack it in until it gets up to basically 16-inch mark. And then you take another piece of plywood and you put it on top of that. And that's called slip forming. And so you put all your light clay straw in here and you pack it up until it's level with the top. And then you take the one from the bottom and you put it up to the top. And so you just kind of leapfrog your way up the walls like that, packing as you're going. And so you can do the whole wall. Now you'll see there's kind of a little bit of a line right here. can see where it changes consistency. And the reason for that is, I'll just tilt the camera up a little bit so you can see it there, is I put the roof on this building before I started doing the light clay straw, so the light straw clay. So that would have been, it would be a lot easier if I didn't have the roof on, so that my stud cavities were wide open. So that I could just pack all the way up and just put my top plate on when I was finished. I didn't do that because I wanted to have the roof on, just for protection and just ease, and also because I'm doing only 3.5-inch walls, I wasn't doing like the standard kind of stagger stud construction, which is where you actually have two 2x4s with a brace in between it every kind of 4 feet, and they make these they look like little ladders. And that becomes a unit that allows you to get to your 11 or 12-inch thick wall. I wasn't doing that, so I just have a single stud. So in order to support the walls, I needed to have a top plate on there to hold everything together because I didn't have that ladder. So because I had my top plate on there, I couldn't pack all the way up. So once I got to about here, you can see there's a line all the way across. And so what I did there is I just mixed a thicker mixture of clay and straw together, so it was more like cob. And then I could, without any form there, I could just pack it into the walls. And you can see it's quite tight. And it made a really nice consistency. It's good and solid. Because I didn't have that ladder brace system, you can kind of see as this wall dried, it's moving a little bit when I push on it. Normally you'd have pieces of wood or bamboo that you actually run through that ladder system in the middle to help kind of reinforce any stresses along that axis. But again, this is an experiment. I was purely just trying to figure out like the speed of it, the workflow, to see how scalable this would be to do by hand on a bigger building, and to make sure that I could get my ratios right. So as I built all these walls, I was playing around with different consistencies to try to see what was going to work best. And another really good rule of thumb from the books is when you grab a handful of the light straw clay with the slip on it, when you grab a handful of it, and you're supposed to twist it together, and you want it to stick together. So like when you twist it and kind of push it, it should stay together, but it shouldn't drip. Like you shouldn't be able to wring any water off of it. But it also shouldn't be, something where there's so much clay on it that it, just becomes, you can make it into a ball and it just stays there. So you kind of want to twist it, and it should hold itself with the, as you're twisting it. Now, another really great tip that I found in terms of packing with ease is and this is why it took me several days, almost a week to build this, is I was doing everything in small batches and using time and waiting to accomplish work for me. So I was using, I had big hunks of clay as opposed to me screening it and buying a pulverizer and a chipper and stuff to make it nice clay lumps. I just put it in 5-gallon buckets and let it sit overnight, and the water softened it for me. So there's no work. In the same way, when I mix the light straw clay mixture, as opposed to taking it and then packing it right away, I let it sit overnight, which they do recommend in the books, because that allows the clay and the water to soften the straw a little bit better, and it packs a lot nicer. So it actually takes, Ben and I found it was about 30 to 50% easier and faster to pack the next day after you made the light straw clay slip, or the light straw clay mixture. So those are a few kind of tips in terms of the workflow. So it was like 5-gallon buckets soaked overnight. Mix your slip in a big drum with the same drum mixer. Once you get your consistency right, make a wooden platform. Dump that straw out on the platform, and just with a 5-gallon bucket, throw the clay on the straw, mix it in with your forks, pile all that into a pile on the edge of the platform right next to your building. Put a tarp or something over top of that if it's really hot out. I was just mixing in the evening so that it wasn't going to dry out all day. And if it got dry, I could just hose it down with a bit of water. And then from there, I just went right into my building. So I actually had a kind of a nice staging system so that, the clay, the slip, the straw, and then the light straw clay all together, and then into the building and packing it. It was all kind of designed. So I just picked a nice flat spot out in the yard and was able to, just do it all by hand without a bunch of equipment. In the books and stuff, they talk about, having pallets and tractors and stuff to bring it over to the. And if you're doing a house, you definitely need to do that to think about that workflow to make it efficient. But again, on a small scale like this, it wasn't such a big deal. So it's the other thing that's really important to one of the downsides with this light straw clay is it takes about 1 week per inch to let the mixture dry inside the walls. And you basically have to have both sides exposed. So because I was only doing 3.5 inches, I actually have the sheathing on the outside that I never took off. So you actually have to slip form on both sides of the wall as you're going up, and then peel all the layers off and let it dry for almost 3 months in like good drying conditions. So you basically have to be finished your straw by the first part of June. So you have June, July, and all of August. Because in September in our climate, it starts to really cool down in the evenings. So it really does. It's a long building season, and you can't really do anything else apart from working on the roof and stuff in those extra 3 months. So it would take a bit longer. In my case, it only took about 3 weeks to dry. I went kind of 4. I actually have a moisture tester that we use for checking the moisture on hay bales, and I was able to stick that into the walls and check it to make sure that it was below the typically you're going for about 17% moisture. At least that's what we go for with our hay bales. So yeah, all in all, it was a really good experiment. It was quite fun actually to do the work. It was really like once you get into a rhythm of it, it's a lot of manual work. It's enjoyable, really satisfying to especially when I could really see this being a ton of fun with like a big work party, and because you don't have to have a lot of skill to pack straw into a wall. As long as you had a good manager or a good contractor or yourself who had everything kind of laid out in stages, it would be just like a party where you could just get together and have some beers and over the course of a weekend or a week or something like that, just have everybody up on the walls packing in with even their feet and stuff. And I think it'd be a really good system. The key drawback that I found was in terms of like the limiting factor or the weak link in the scale of producing the light straw clay was the mixing together. And so they've got these tumblers that they talk about in the book. I wasn't a fan of them. They seemed really expensive and like a specialized piece of equipment. Maybe that's the only way to do it. But what I would love to do an experiment with, and if there's somebody out here, if there's somebody else who owns one of these, basically they're called a feed mixer, like a TMR or like a Cadillac or some kind of a tub mixer that they use on typically on like feedlots and places like that. But they're designed for putting in like a whole round bale of straw, or sometimes even 2 straw bales. So it's like 2,000 pounds of straw. And then you can put liquid into them because they'll actually add water to cut the dust, and even molasses and other things like that to make dairy rations and things. So I was thinking like, man, if you could get one of these machines, even if you could borrow one from a neighbor like a local dairy farm and just hire them once you got the mixture right, and they actually have scales on the machines, so you could like put in your straw, 2 straw bales, and then know what your ratios were, because you could do a small sample. Okay, so there's 2,000 pounds of straw, we want whatever 500 pounds of clay slip. You got a scale right on there, you just dump in the clay slip until it's ready, you turn the machine on, it'll mix it all up, and it'll just auger it into a pile. So I kind of envision if you could get a system like that going, where you could mix huge quantities of the straw clay. You could even like potentially, some of them have long enough chutes, you might even be able to auger it into the walls themselves and just kind of drive around the building. That would be a game changer for this style of natural building. So anyways, I just wanted to give you an update kind of on what I'm working on. It's now been about 4 weeks for this stuff drying, so I'm ready to now close this wall up, and I'm just going to use regular plywood. I'm not going to do an airspace behind it. Normally you would want to have some kind of a vertical or horizontal purlins or strapping on the walls, so that when you put your sheeting on, there's an airflow in between the clay and Everything else, I'm not too concerned about it because it's a shed outside. It's also plywood, so there will be enough breathing. So I'm just gonna put some 3/8 plywood on this guy. Put my shelving in here. I've got a window and a door to throw in the building, and I'll do an update on that once it's all done and I get my little pigeon nest boxes set up, and hopefully we have some pigeons coming in. But yeah, I just wanted to give you an update on this new natural building technique that I've been doing. So far, I'm really pleased with it. I think it's going to have real potential. My next thing is I would love to do some experiments trying to figure out how to mechanize the mixing a little bit more, because if you had that and you've got 10-15 friends, you could easily do a lot of this light straw clay without a ton of work. But even the way that they mix in the books, it's all handheld. Those drum mixers, you're manually putting in a little bit of straw at a time with a fork, just like a flake at a time, and then you got to turn a tap to get the clay mixture. This is like, no, throw in 2,000 pounds of straw, have a pump that just dumps in 500 pounds of clay, turn the machine on for 15 minutes, and you're done. And you just mix piles of that all around the building, and from there you can just chuck it up. Because the packing, even though this building took me about 4 or 5 days to pack, or if I was doing full days, a day and a half for 2 people, I don't think it would actually take any faster, or sorry, I don't think it would take any longer if I was doing a 12-inch wall, if I could find a way to speed up the straw mixing. Because it's no time at all to do the packing. The packing would take about the same amount of time. So you start thinking about that is like you could build 1,000 square foot house. This building is 100 square feet. It's 10 by 10. So you could easily build 1,000, 2,000 square foot house in a week with a dozen friends packing this stuff in. And with just the basic books, you could hire almost any contractor to frame your walls for you, following their simple instructions. And you have to do a little bit of extra stuff with the electrical and the plumbing, because you want to run those inside the walls typically. But other than that, I'm really excited about it. And there's straw and clay are abundantly available in most ecosystems. So yeah, I think it's a really low tech, potentially the most scalable of any building, natural building technique, without requiring a factory somewhere to make the hemp blocks or the SIP panels for straw or whatever, and using some of these feed mixers that almost every large scale farm has to scale this up. So I haven't done that the samples I haven't done any experiments for mixing with those machines. I would love to try it. If somebody has one, please try to do a video on it and send it to me. I would love to see the mixture, because some of the machines, the only hesitation I have with the feed mixers is some of the way that some of the mixers are designed to actually chop the straw as they're mixing, and to cut it up, they actually have blades on it, versus other ones, because there's like horizontal mixers, there's vertical mixing tub grinders and there's horizontal mixing tub grinders. And I don't know which one would work best, but I wouldn't want to have any knives on it, because you want the long straws so that they pack together nicely. So if you had that feed mixer with the blades on it, I don't think it would work quite as well. But so if anybody has one of those, please do a sample. It's a cheap experiment. Get some some straw and some clay, mud basically, and see what it's like. Because if we can scale this up, this would be a phenomenal, especially with the rising cost of building materials. Insulation is ungodly expensive, and a full bale of straw is like $50, on the high end. And so if you could build this with, versus if you were to pay for that as Roxol or fiberglass insulation bats, or even blown-in insulation, I don't think you could compete with it. Thanks so much for watching this video on my experiments with light straw clay. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you've got enough from this video that you can go out and maybe do some experiments on your own. Please let me know how things work out for your experiments. And if you happen to have one of those tub grinders, absolutely make a video on that, and please send me the link. All right, until next time, guys. I'm gonna get back to work on this building, and I'll give you an update once I get it all sheathed in and sided and ready for pigeons. We'll talk to you later. Bye.